From the moment the young United States and British North America, what would become Canada, first eyed each other across the border, their relationship has been a story of rivalry, cooperation, and shared destiny. At first glance, the U.S. and Canada might look like natural allies, neighbors with a peaceful border, deep economic ties, and overlapping security interests. But dig a little deeper, and you find a relationship shaped by war, diplomacy, trade tensions, and cultural contrasts. To understand how their shared history has shaped not only North America, but the broader world, we need to explore this relationship through a fresh lens, one that highlights the complex, multifaceted evolution of two very different but deeply interlinked nations. In the very early days, geopolitical dynamics cast long shadows. After the American Revolution, 1765 to 1783, the newly independent United States and the still British-ruled Canadian territories did not immediately become partners. Instead, British North America remained loyal to the Crown, while the U.S. solidified its own identity. Borders were ill-defined, claims overlapped, and tensions simmered under the surface. These early years set the stage for future conflict, most notably the War of 1812, when the U.S. launched multiple invasions into Canadian territory. While the conflict ended in a stalemate, the 1814 Treaty of Ghent formally ended hostilities and restored pre-war borders. Rather than creating permanent animosity, the result was a kind of reset, an acknowledgement that conquest was not a sustainable path for either side, and that neither would subsume the other so easily. That uneasy peace gave way to a slow, cautious cooperation. One of the first major turning points in their economic relationship came with the Canadian-American Reciprocity Treaty, signed in 1854 between the United States and British North America. That treaty lowered barriers on raw materials, natural resources flowed more freely, and economic interdependence grew. But the arrangement didn't last indefinitely. By 1866, protectionist elements in the U.S. and political concerns in Canada caused the treaty to collapse. Still, it marked a turning point, a realization that mutual economic benefit could bridge long-standing political divides. Territorial disputes continued to punctuate the relationship. The Alaska Boundary Dispute, 1867 to 1903, is a striking example. After the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia in 1867, conflicting maps and competing claims raised tensions between Washington and London, and by extension, Canada. The arbitration decision in 1903 largely favored the U.S., leaving Canada without a direct all-Canadian outlet from the Yukon to the sea, and sowing some bitterness among Canadians. Yet, over time, these disputes made way for a broader pattern of negotiated settlement rather than outright conquest. As the 20th century dawned, the U.S.-Canada relationship began to deepen in earnest. During World War I and especially World War II, the two nations cooperated more closely than ever before. In 1940, they signed the Ogdensburg Accord, which laid the foundation for permanent mutual defense. That accord symbolized a turning point. Canada and the U.S. were no longer mere neighbors, but strategic partners. The intimacy of that alliance deepened during World War II, when Canada played a vital role supplying war materials and became tightly embedded in Allied supply networks. After the war, the two countries institutionalized their security relationship. In 1949, Canada joined NATO, aligning formally with the U.S. and European allies. Then, in 1958, the establishment of NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, created a framework for continental defense. The airspaces of Canada and the U.S. would be defended jointly, a powerful symbol of mutual trust. The Wilson Center has described this as the moment when their militaries and strategic interests became truly interwoven. Economic integration followed on the heels of military cooperation. In the mid-1960s, a landmark agreement known as the Auto Pact, or the Canada-U.S. Automotive Products Agreement, eliminated many tariffs on vehicles and parts. This transformed cross-border industrial production and laid the foundations for deeply interdependent manufacturing ecosystems. As factories straddled the border in spirit if not in geography, Canada and the U.S. became tied at the hips economically. Trade would continue to shape their relationship through the late 19th century. In 1988, the two countries signed their first comprehensive free trade agreement, paving the way for even more integration. A few years later, this was expanded when Mexico joined, creating NAFTA in 1994. That agreement marked a new era, three North American nations deeply enmeshed economically, with supply chains that ignored borders and corporations that treated Canada as a natural extension of U.S. operations.
But interdependence hasn't always translated to harmony. Trade tensions have exploded periodically. For instance, in recent years, disagreements over tariffs, especially under the Trump administration, reignited fears in Canada of economic coercion. The deep economic ties that once felt like security began to feel like vulnerability to some Canadians. As one commentator put it, Canada's heavy reliance on the U.S. economy raised existential questions about sovereignty. In fact, as of 2023, around 77% of Canadian goods exports went to the United States. That's not just trade, it's a structural dependency. Diplomatic tensions haven't always come from trade alone. In the 19th century, there was the Caroline Affair, 1837 through 1842, a crisis born of U.S. support for Canadian rebels during the Upper Canada Rebellion. A U.S. steamboat named Caroline carried supplies to Canadian rebels, and British forces attacked it on U.S. soil. This incident helped shape early international law debates about cross-border intervention and underscored just how messy geography, politics, and loyalty could be. Still, over time, Canada and the U.S. found that cooperation often paid far more than competition. In the Cold War era, their shared interests in security, economic stability, and international order pushed them closer together. Canada's rich resources, timber, minerals, oil, became integral to American supply chains. Meanwhile, the U.S. increasingly saw Canada not just as a neighbor, but as a critical strategic partner, especially in defense. Science and innovation deepened the bond. During World War II and beyond, Canada contributed essential resources like uranium and heavy water to the Manhattan Project. Canadian researchers and material helped lay the foundation for the nuclear age. The technical collaboration that began in wartime carried into the Cold War and beyond, reflecting a level of trust and shared purpose rarely seen in other bilateral relationships. Beyond trade and defense, cultural and political identities added texture to their relationship. Canadians often balance a sense of closeness with a desire to remain distinct, not just geographically, but culturally. Canadian political leaders have repeatedly affirmed that Canada's identity should not and will not be swallowed by its giant neighbor. At the same time, U.S. economic muscle and global reach meant American policy decisions reverberated deeply in Canada, whether in trade, defense, immigration, or environmental regulation. In the 21st century, that complex dynamic continues to evolve. A recent update to the Columbia River Treaty, for example, shows how modern resource management reflects both cooperation and sovereignty. Infrastructure projects like the Gordie Howe International Bridge under construction over the Detroit River physically embody the connection between the two countries. These projects highlight not just shared geography, but shared futures. Yet the relationship is not without strain. In recent years, trade disputes, tariff threats, political friction, and broader questions about economic alignment have sparked fresh debate. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney made headlines by declaring that the old relationship, based on deepening integration, is over, calling for a broad renegotiation of trade and security ties. That moment underscored a growing reevaluation in Ottawa: how to preserve national sovereignty while maintaining economic benefit. Still, despite tensions, the bonds are durable. Their shared history is not defined by a single thread, but by the intertwining of war and peace, trade and tension, defense and diplomacy. What began as a cautious border relationship has matured into one of the most significant bilateral partnerships in the world, a relationship that's simultaneously intimate, unequal, resilient, and essential. From the early conflicts like the War of 1812 and the Caroline Affair, through the mid-century defense institutions of NATO and NORAD, to modern trade agreements and cross-border infrastructure, the U.S.-Canada relationship has shaped the geopolitics, culture, and economic matrix of the North American continent. It's a story of neighbors who became partners, not by erasing their differences, but by weaving them into a stronger tapestry. And as both nations face new challenges, climate change, shifting trade landscapes, and geopolitical uncertainty, their shared past offers lessons. The legacy of their relationship shows that sometimes history doesn't just live in the textbooks, it lives in the bridges we build, the agreements we negotiate, and the trust we forge across borders.